that takes us to 10 days out, taper time. All right. I'm not going to get into the details of exactly how to taper. Tapering is very simple, but a lot of people just try and reinvent the wheel. And there's like one or two things that you should do during a taper. And there's like hundreds and hundreds of things that you could do that can mess things up before you go. So when in doubt during a taper, this is just general across the board advice during your last 2 weeks before you go to selection, as you dial back the training intensity, dial back the training volume. Think, when in doubt, just do nothing. You're better off doing nothing at all than trying some new strategy or inventing your own mobility routine that you have never done before, or trying to eat these new foods, or trying this new hydration or sleep strategy. Just do what you've been doing. Really, the only difference is you're going to train less and you're going to train shorter. Your training sessions are going to be shorter. You might eat a little bit less too, just depending on how high you got your calories, but you don't want to eat way less because you want to go in well fueled and feeling good, because you're not going to eat that much at selection. But you really want to sleep well. You really want to stay active, keep your mind in the right place. Don't do all these things that are going to distract you. Tapering is the hardest part for most people. Most high-level athletes struggle with tapering psychologically, and most type A individuals who are prepping for selection start getting these doubts creeping into their mind, and they're like, oh no, what if I didn't train this enough? What if I didn't train that enough? I should go test myself on it, or I should just start training it really quickly and try and make all these adaptations in the last 10 days. That's not possible to make adaptations in the last 10 days. You can mess yourself up in lots of different ways on a taper and just completely undo the entire year of what I just talked about by trying to reinvent the wheel during your taper. So if anything, and if in doubt, just do nothing. Eat a sandwich, go for a walk, take a nap, read a book, something like that. Those are all great taper activities. And no matter what, everybody who goes into selection is going to feel like they didn't do enough. They're going to feel doubts. They're going to feel worry. They're going to feel uncertainty. That is just normal. That's something to embrace. And there's nothing you can do about it. Even if you go and try and like tie up all these loose ends or just randomly do a bunch of shit that you don't think you did enough of, it's not going to make that doubt go away. And it's just going to make you more physically fatigued, and probably on the back end, like indirectly going to make you more stressed, because now you know, like, oh shit, why do I feel so fatigued? And I have 3 days till I go to selection. So just consider that. As far as what you should do, tapers can be anywhere from a week to 3 weeks, depending on how long you train for, your physical fitness levels, how well structured or poorly structured your training was, how fatigued you are, your recovery, et cetera, et cetera. So I have the 10 days here, but it could be a little bit longer. Usually with most of my clients, I taper them for about 2 weeks, sometimes 3, occasionally 1. But if you are going in the fall, which most likely, if you're listening to this episode and you're still a year or even less than that out, if you're going later than 2025, just consider that 4 or 5 days before you actually start selection will be kind of part of the taper, because you're going to be going and doing land nav. This is different if you're an 18 X-ray, of course. You're going to SOPSI, then you have a week off, then you go. But that'll be kind of part of the taper. Yes, you do a lot of walking in the woods, but you don't have a ruck on. And if you trained up anywhere near sufficiently, then it's not going to be too much of a detrimental thing on your preparation. So just consider that. When you're tapering, you want to reduce volume first and foremost. You can keep intensity kind of high, especially if you're doing a longer taper. You can keep your speed work in. I wouldn't necessarily keep it in, but you absolutely can continue to touch on speed. This is when we come back to touching on speed. If you only do a bunch of slow running, or if you just take 2 weeks off or whatever it may be, you're still going to be fine. But if you have at least touched on speed those few times, so you do some strides, or you do some intra-run pickups, or you do some hill work every so often as part of a very easy taper run, then you're going to be better off when you start the 2 mile and you have to go super fast, because you'll have touched on that speed going into that, as opposed to just only running slow, or only doing non-impact stuff, or only doing nothing. Even though I said to do nothing, I don't actually mean that, but you guys kind of get what I'm talking about. Additionally, and this should not have to be said, but I will say it, only do things that you've been doing. If you're going to do any sort of taper workouts, whether you're reducing volume, intensity, or both, generally, as you get closer, you're going to want to reduce both as part of the taper, but don't do anything new. Don't randomly just go swim 5 days 1 week, or randomly go and do a bunch of biking or a bunch of Stairmaster or something that you haven't been doing throughout your entire selection prep. or the entire year that I just talked about. For whatever reason, guys like to reinvent the wheel and try these new hacks. They have a little bit more time on their hands. They start getting a little worried. They're like, ooh, maybe I should try this. Don't. Just do the same things you've been doing, just easier and shorter, significantly easier and shorter progressively. If you have a longer taper, progressively shorter. If you have a shorter taper, you want to cut a little bit faster, cut the volume a little bit faster. Make sure you continue to practice a little bit of calisthenics. You don't necessarily need to keep training the calisthenics and like go into failure on push-ups and pull-ups or anything like that, but you still want to get a few sessions in, maybe every few days or so. You want to do some push-ups and pull-ups, just not in a fatiguing way, just to keep the range of motion down, just to keep the muscle memory up. And that way, when you get to the PT assessment, it's not a super foreign thing to you because you haven't done a push-up in 2 weeks or a pull-up in 2 weeks. So a little bit of practice, nothing crazy. At this point as well, you likely want to drop rucks. You can, if you want, just so you have the muscle memory of wearing a ruck around. You can wear your ruck around the house a little bit. Do not go overboard with this and do it like 8 hours a day. But if you want to wear a ruck an hour a day every few days around the house, 55, 60 pound ruck, you can do that. And that'll make it so that, again, when you put the ruck on day 1 or day 2, whatever it is, it's not going to be quite as foreign to you. But do not go overboard with this. And if you don't do it, you're going to be totally fine. It's just going to be a little bit more of, not necessarily a shock, but it's going to be a little bit more novel to you when you put it on. So you can wear your ruck around a little bit. The next one is very important. No new stretches, no becoming a mobility king. For whatever reason, people will finish their super awesome training thing. They do maybe a little bit of mobility throughout, and then, okay, it's taper time. What do I do with my time now? Don't go and spend 3 hours a day on mobility. Don't do all these random stretches that you find on YouTube. When in doubt, you don't need to be more mobile. Mobility makes you more mobile. Stretching makes you more flexible. Yes, they both have effects on your nervous system. They can help you calm down. But when in doubt, don't do it, because I've had more clients hurt themselves stretching, making up their own stretches. And the last 3 to do this have been in the last 3 weeks before they go to selection. They make up their own stretches. I'm not in the loop about these things. Now I have to have a disclaimer for like all of my clients who are prepping for selection. Like, don't do this random stretch. If you want to stretch, let me know and I'll let you know like kind of how to do it and whether you should do it or not. But anyway, this happened. More clients hurt themselves stretching than running, rucking, and lifting combined. So that's saying a lot. Not saying that stretching's bad, not saying that mobility's bad. Just don't try and come up with some crazy formula that you just thought might be a good idea and just throw it in. So don't be a mobility king. In general, you're better off just going for a walk, having a sandwich, taking a nap than you are spending 2, 3, 4 hours on mobility during your taper, because you don't need to become more mobile. You don't need to become more flexible. If you didn't do any mobility and your mobility sucks, you don't train with a full range of motion, guess what? The 10 days before SFAS is not the time to build it. So no mobility king shit. Just be reasonable with it and don't try and reinvent the wheel. Start sleeping like a champ. Really get a shit ton of sleep. You're not going to get much sleep at selection, so you want to show up as well rested as you can. Whatever your mindfulness strategy is that hopefully you start developing way out and practicing way out, really do a lot of that in your last few weeks before you go, and try and reduce the outside stress, whether it's meditation, journaling, breath work, going on nice walks in nature, whatever you prefer. That's what you should do, because a lot of people will use their training as a stress reliever. And when they start tapering, although a healthy relationship with exercise and a good solid training regimen can absolutely help with stress management, it shouldn't be your only thing, because when you start tapering and you're going to be naturally more stressed out anyway, because you're going to be thinking about selection and you don't have that outlet, you're going to want to have built a stress management technique that you're already really good at going into this last few days, so that you can actually reduce your stress, relax, go to sleep, handle yourself, and not just be freaking the fuck out the entire time. Also, you want to consider tapering and cutting out caffeine. I would say at least 10 days out, you should be at caffeine 0. If you want to go cold turkey, that's fine. You're going to feel kind of shitty for a few days, depending on how much caffeine you drink, but it's during your taper, so you don't necessarily need to use caffeine for preparation for training or anything like that. It's okay to feel a little bit shitty for a few days. So you can absolutely go cold turkey, or you can start further out and start tapering. Maybe cut it in half for a few days, cut it in a quarter for a few days, and then kind of cut it out, whatever it may be. There's lots of different caffeine tapering strategies. I have a few of them in my soft prep recovery guide. But if you are at caffeine 0 before you go, you are going to be able to, there's a few benefits of being a caffeine zero. One, it takes about 11 to 13 days for you to fully resensitize yourself to caffeine. So everyone probably remembers the first time they ever had caffeine and how amazing it felt. Most likely, if you are like most people, you don't feel that anymore because you're addicted to caffeine and use it all the time. I'm the same way, not saying that's a bad thing. But when you resensitize yourself, it's going to feel like that again. So you're going to feel much more motivated. You're going to be in a better mood. You're going to perform better physically and cognitively. So when you cut it out, you resensitize yourself. When you get to selection and you get MREs, they have these little coffee packets and you can use those to your advantage. You can take those before a ruck, or you can take those when you're really struggling to stay awake in the classroom or something like that. If you don't cut your caffeine off, you're going to have withdrawals the first couple of days of selection. You're going to feel like shit. You don't want to be going through caffeine withdrawals during gate week because that's not a performance enhancer at all. You're just going to feel terrible. Everyone's a little bit different, and it also does depend on how much caffeine you are drinking. But in general, you don't feel great when you go off caffeine if you're just used to drinking it every day. You may be thinking, well, I can just use the coffee packets. Well, those coffee packets, unless you're having like 50 to 70 milligrams of caffeine per day, which is like 8 ounces of coffee, maybe 6 ounces of coffee, then you're not going to feel anything. They're not enough to support a caffeine habit, but they are enough to give you a benefit of caffeine if and only if you are resensitized to them. So hopefully that makes sense. Definitely a good idea not to go into selection caffeine addicted. You will perform better, you'll feel better, and you'll actually be able to use the caffeine to your advantage. Stay off your damn devices. Along the lines of the stress thing, most of you hopefully have probably noticed when you do a bunch of unintentional scrolling, or when you binge watch shows all day long, or you go down YouTube rabbit holes, you feel terrible afterwards. I actually had a client recently who is a National Guard guy, and he's done a couple of SFREs recently, and we couldn't really figure out why he wasn't performing all that well. He just didn't seem to be getting better week to week in his training. And then he hit me up and he's like, hey man, check out my last week of training. It's like, I'm a completely different person. And I'm like, what the hell did you do? He's like, I deleted my Instagram and I stopped using my phone for random shit other than like calls and texts. That was literally the only variable he changed. So I'm not saying that that is definitely definitively what's going to happen to you. If you just delete Instagram, you're not just going to become significantly faster and better and recover better and feel better, but it absolutely will likely affect your psyche as well as your stress levels, as well as your physical performance. So I'm not saying just delete Instagram and delete everything, never go on YouTube, whatever it may be. But when in doubt, if you're bored, it's okay to just let yourself be bored for a little bit. Newsflash, in SF, at some points of your career, you're just going to feel bored. That's how it is. But B, just do something like go for a walk or listen to a podcast or read a book or something like that. Something that is more relaxing and maybe informative rather than dopamine. And then you just feel terrible afterwards. And that's it. Finally, last thing you're going to do is go fucking smash and get selected.